Okay.
Bing, bing, bing.
Let's go. I'd like to call the work session to order December 17th, 5 p.m. We're all around the table. We have one that's above. He's calling in. Are you there,
Good evening.
Bill?
Hello.
Hello, Bill. Thank you for taking the time on your busy schedule to call in tonight. So the first agenda item is an update on the status of the non-sworn pay structure and a recommendation for bringing this structure and employees within this structure close to the market. Council will also receive an update on the overhaul of performance evaluation, which includes a separate program for recognizing employees that perform at exceptional level. Lynette Reed, Human Resources Director, to present.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. We are so excited to be here because we get to talk about compensation and performance management. It's thrilling for us. And sitting next to me is Sandra Healy. She's our HR Organizational Strategy Manager, and she's going to take a part of the presentation tonight also. And behind us we have Team HR if you have any other questions that we aren't able to answer. So we're prepared.
It's very nice to see him in the meeting again.
Yes, it is, isn't it? It's nice to have him back. Okay, I am going to the next slide here. Our agenda for the night, as the Mayor stated, we are going to go over the non-sworn pay structure and performance evaluation. Earlier this year, in another work session, Council asked us to look at, evaluate, compare, contrast, and come back with recommendations as to what we could do with the non-sworn pay structure and the performance evaluation. There was great dissatisfaction, not only from the Council on the performance evaluation tool and process, but throughout the city. And then also there was a request to develop a program or find a way for recognizing employees who are truly exceptional. And so we have some suggestions, some recommendations tonight to discuss with you as we go through this. We would encourage you to ask questions as we go through. Both Sandra and I are pretty flexible in that. And it's a discussion, so we can find out if we're kind of meeting the target, if we're a little bit off and we need to do a course correction here, or what our next steps are. So is that
Great.
good?
Yes, that's fine.
All
Thank you.
right. Then, if everybody's okay, we're going to start with the non-sworn pay structure. And I did flip a couple slides. They're all there, but I just flipped this one with the other one. I wanted to take a moment to kind of explain for everybody, so we're all on the same page, the non-sworn versus the sworn, and that what we're talking about, so we're clear. Earlier this year, we did address the sworn pay structure, and the sworn individuals who what we call sworn are those individuals that get to turn the lights on, go fast, and some of them carry guns, but most of them have lights, and they're sworn, they have badges. The non-sworn are everybody else. We do have non-sworn personnel within the fire and police departments, but they are not, they don't carry the badges and they don't have the lights and sirens. So this specifically addresses the non-sworn pay structure because we addressed the issues with the sworn earlier in the year. When we last met, the Council's interest concerning the non-sworn pay structure, you asked that we come back with a structure that would move non-sworn employees closer to market, eliminate steps, and I smile when I say this because Councilmember Gelser was very clear at that time that if there were steps in the exempt, he wasn't going to be very happy. And then he also wanted us to look at the non-exempts also and determine whether we should have steps in those pay ranges. You also asked that it be flexible, explainable, defendable, and legal. So as we go through this, I think we've hit the mark in many ways, but there are a variety of ways that we can handle this. And as we go through this, feel free to provide your comments. The current structure, our current structures here, this is just an example of what our current structures look like. You'll notice that there's a 604, 605, and 606 on the side. Those are different pay grades. We have multiple pay grades. And jobs are slotted into pay grades based on internal equity, point factoring, and external market. So jobs are assigned to pay grades. We have 17 steps within each pay grade currently for the non-sworn pay plan. Each step is 2.5% apart. So if you are in step 2, to move to step 3 would be a 2.5% increase, and up to 4 is another 2.5% increase. When we were funding pay increases through the performance appraisal process, in the past, if the employee had a does not meet, there was not an increase. But if they had a successful, they received a 1-step or a 2.5% increase. If they were outstanding, then they received a 2-step or 5% increase. And that's how they progressed from step 1 up to the top of the range, and 17. Right here in the middle is what we generally refer to as midpoint. And that obviously is the middle of the range. But what we would like to refer to this as market, because when we look at, we go out and we survey our benchmark organizations, our other 10 cities, we look at, for example, an accountant. And what does that accountant get paid there? And we take the average salaries of that and we determine what the market is. And that's where our midpoint should be. So another way to look at this is where the market should be, right here, and you develop a pay range around it. So you have some individuals lower in the market and some above the market, but your center should be the market. And again, it's determined based on the average salaries of the benchmark jobs. Any questions? Okay. So in 2012, we did our survey of our benchmark cities, and what we found was our structures are competitive and at market. So if you look again at that market, the midpoint of the ranges, we're doing well because our midpoints align with what the average salaries are out in the market. I do want to clarify this, that we only look right now at our 10 benchmark cities, which are the public sector employers, and we don't look at public sector, just our private sector, it's the public sector. In the survey this year, our non-exempt, those are the hourlies that are eligible for overtime, Goodyear average salaries for non-exempt employees versus market average salaries was at 91%. Again, that market would be 100%, so they're below market. I do want to clarify, though, that when we have, let me see, we have several positions within the exempt and non-exempt pay grades, and right now we only survey 14% of those jobs. One of the recommendations I will make tonight is that we increase the number of jobs that we survey next year so we get a better understanding of what the market is for more positions. So this is a very narrow look at what our jobs are compared to the market. Only 14% of those are surveyed. So in the exempt area, again, Goodyear average salaries versus...
Just a quick question. If you're only surveying 14% from a statistical reliability, do you feel comfortable with that 91% there?
It's a statistically, I would say no. It's a target there, because if you really look at, and as I explain in the next bullet down here, we have 294 employees within the exempt and non-exempt. 71% of those employees are below market, so they're somewhere in there. So 91% is probably pretty high when you only look at 14%.
No, I guess what I'm getting at is if you're only looking at 14% of the positions, and you have how many positions?
We have, and I have that number written down here. We have actually 219.
So you're only surveying 30 positions?
Yep.
39 positions?
Yep.
Do you feel comfortable on the average? And I guess that's what I'm getting at is I tend to agree with you. You probably need to survey more than 14% to get a better feel on that percentage. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Yep, I agree with you. My recommendation would be to add more to this. We've added some, but we need to add a lot more. If we really want to understand what the market is, you have to survey as many jobs as you can. And obviously we want good matches, but we need to increase that number.
Okay.
But this is how it's been presented in the past, so I wanted to make sure we had some continuity with that.
Yes, Sherry?
And I don't know if this would be too much work, but it seems like to get some sort of baseline, would this be something we could look at all the positions so you guys could have a baseline? Because since you're redoing everything, I don't know if that's something you could do or would be helpful so we know which ones, if there's certain positions that are just way under and certain that are higher.
We can look at as many as we can find matches for, and we want to have good matches out there. So some of our jobs can be unique because in restructuring or reorganizations, you may combine jobs that you're just not going to find even in another public sector agency. And so accountants are good ones to survey. You know, you have a lot of them that you can survey, and then we're limited by that.
Joanne?
A few years ago when we had the compensation classification study that was done, and I could not tell you, so I'm going to ask, do you know how many positions at that point had been studied over?
90.
Okay, so that was a little broader. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. And this brings us to the last point in here, that 209 employees, or 71% of our non-sworn employees, are below market. We have 294 employees who are actually in the non-sworn categories, and 209 of them are below that midpoint. So they're being paid less than the market, and our market is our 10 benchmark cities. So I have a couple proposals here for discussion tonight, and I'm going to walk you through each one of those and get your feedback and thoughts and see if we miss the mark or if we're close and getting closer or warmer. The first one is an open range, and when I discuss these, I am speaking about both the exempt and non-exempt, so moving to an open range for both the exempt and non-exempt. In this particular structure, and you can almost see the blue, it's not very clear on this one I'm looking at, the minimum of the range is $20.08 and the maximum of $29.80. That's an actual range that we have. It's just one, but I'm using it as an example. And then the midpoint is a market. You'll notice that there's no steps in there. It's a wide open range. Employees can be placed within that range anywhere between the $20.08 to the $29.80. Movement through this range does go from minimum to maximum. In this particular scenario, though, there isn't a predefined progression or movement through the range. That is determined annually by council through the budget process. So instead of set steps of 2.5%, which that's what they would move through, I am using a number, totally random number, 2.2%. I wanted to show that there's flexibility in this. So you could determine annually through the budget process. This year it could be 2.2%, maybe it's 1.5%, maybe it's 5%. It's whatever council feels we can afford, so there's that flexibility. In this example with a 2.2%, no matter where the employee is in the range, everyone will move 2.2%. So as this moves, I know it goes past market, but that's the way the animation just carried it that far. But everybody moves just 2.2%. So they progress from min to max that way.
I know we don't want to tie directly to performance to reviews, but it's my understanding that will only happen if they meet requirements of the review.
Mm-hmm. And that's
I just want to make sure we clarify that. It's just not an automatic. They've got to meet performance.
Right, and when Sandra addresses the performance evaluation, we'll get into that at a much deeper level, but it's a good point. So in this scenario, everybody moves the same percentage, you move from min to max, there's flexibility, and it's determined through the budget process. In this proposed structure number 1, the pros, they eliminate steps, it's flexible, explainable, defendable, and legal. The con is it does not move employees below market to market faster. So I have a proposed structure number 2, and that is open ranges with quartiles. Now, this is the same range as in the previous structure, but what I've done is separated into quartiles here. And so employees would move from the minimum of the range to the maximum of the range as before. And let's use the same example. The budget allowed for a 2.2% increase, again determined annually through the process and by council. In this particular scenario, individuals in the first quartile would get a 3% increase. Individuals in the second quartile, a 2.5%. Individuals in the third quartile and those above market, so above the average salaries being paid, would receive a 1.5% and a 1% one time. So it doesn't go into base and it's not ongoing, but the 1.5% does go into base. Those in the fourth quartile would receive a 1% and a 1.5% one time, again not going into base that one time. The budget is increased by 2.2%, but there is varying increases depending on what quartile you are in. Whoops, got trigger happy there. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. When we look at above market, and we had talked about this before, my concerns about this, morale being one of them, with people only getting a 1% raise, and the other one is the educational component for those people that are over market, to make sure that they understand that they are over market, and any kind of educational component, so that they don't feel that, well, now that I'm only getting a 1% raise, they must not like me anymore, or whatever. So is that something that's figured into this as well?
It is a concern, and as I've mentioned earlier, as you get above market, it's a shift in culture. What we're used to here, and in many organizations, is the steps have been secure. And in looking at our other organizations, our benchmark cities, we're about half and half. About 5 do steps, and then you've got a combination of steps and ranges, and then you've got open. So out of the 10, it's about a 50-50. As to whether they do steps or open ranges. This would be a big shift. And the education component for employees would be a critical step if we were to move in this direction. Because anybody over market, their increases would slow down, but they would be paid above what market is. So what the average salary is out in market. And I do have that in the next one, where some of the pros are it moves employees below market to market faster. So you're getting those employees who are below market, most susceptible to leave, moves them up to market faster. It eliminates the steps. It's flexible, explainable, defendable, and legal. But what it does do is there's slower movement for those individuals above the market range. There's slower movement there, and that is a big shift. You'll also, because this is no longer based on longevity, like if you move everybody at the same pace, then as you come into the queue, then everybody keeps moving, and it's kind of everybody is sorted by longevity. This one, you'll start to see some compression because some people are going to be moving up quicker, and so you're going to get some catching up. It no longer becomes based on longevity. You're looking at it truly from a market perspective. So it really is a matter of how council would like to proceed. There are a variety of ways of designing these, but based on the interest that we heard from council, these are the two options that we've come back to you with, and can look at other options or answer any questions concerning this, but that pretty much is...
Percentage takes the education component.
I'm sorry?
Percentage of employees that take the education
The
component.
tuition reimbursement program, do you have...
Because as I remembered, it wasn't
Jeannie?
that high, the last number of people last time, so that's the reason I'm asking.
Do you know how many are currently, what's the percentage of employees currently taking the tuition reimbursement? It wasn't 25 employees.
Mayor?
Yes, yes, Bill.
When
The floor.
Would bringing back the longevity pay further strengthen or weaken this particular part of option 2?
It could strengthen it because obviously with longevity, those who have been here longer are probably going to be more at the upper end of the pay range. And when we get into the exceptional employee, there's an opportunity for recognizing employees at that end also. I do want to point out we did run some numbers on the longevity pay, and currently for everyone right now, the individuals we have, that would be $182,000 a year without calculating taxes and pension.
And that is the longevity pay system of old, is that correct?
Correct.
Which starts at year 3?
5.
Year 5. Okay, thank you.
And We can look at a different longevity program, redesigning that. That might be something that we could consider also.
Sherry?
Well, I wasn't quite sure on that because 5 seems a little early to be considered longevity. I don't know because I know other cities it is a lot longer, like years and years when you actually max out. But my question is, with the market, what is our theory now under this? Are we looking to hire people at market? Was that where we looked to hire people? Or are we going to try to hire people like new hires below market? And then I guess I'm thinking if we're hiring people around market or closer to market, then this will slowly, that second end of the scale will slowly dissipate after time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Currently, we hire our employees more towards the beginning of the range and then progress them up through the range based on the steps. And that's been the practice as we bring someone in, and we look at internal equity also to make sure that, we know where others are at and we're not leapfrogging someone. But if they have some skills or sets that we're really looking to get and we really need to pay a little extra for it, they could come in higher in the range, but there's a process for that.
I guess for me, it's like when you say market, it seems like that's the market. I guess maybe, I don't know if that word, I don't know. It seems like that should be the market rate, and it seems like how are you going to hire people? It's like you're hiring them under the market.
Below market?
Yeah, that seems a little like, why are they going to come here below market?
That's a good point.
Yeah, and that's very good point. But we have done that, and that's a pretty traditional way to move employees up through. Yes.
Joe?
The other concern, just follow up on what Sherry has mentioned, is equity within the system. If you already have people in the system and the old thing and there's step 3, and you start bringing people at the market, which is step 9, now you got a real problem from an equity standpoint and morale standpoint. And my other concern is when you look at this is, what's your feel on compression with the second plan? Is that going to create a problem, on the compression? Because once you get in the third quartile,
Yeah.
you're looking at 1.5 versus 2.5. So are you going to start compressing those that have, that have the 8, 9, 10, 12 years? How's that going to be? Because that was always a concern used to have, when we did a lot of these, is to make sure you had equity within the job ranks. And then also those that have been here 5 years weren't getting paid the same that would have been here 1 year.
Yes, you will, because this no longer becomes a longevity type of pay structure. It's more of a market-based pay structure. And so if your goal is to move employees up to the market quicker, then once you get past the market, that slows down. And so then there will be some compression because as people move past over, it kind of balances it out. It is a shift in the way we have operated, because we've operated, and many organizations operate on the fact that it's very longevity, seniority based, and you move through it based on steps. So it would be a big shift.
I know a lot of private companies, at least some of the large corporations that I know my son's worked for in the past, what gives you flexibility is when you have an amount for your base, and then you have a one-time amount, which they use depending on how well the company did and that type of thing. It allows you to try to manage your growth and your fixed costs as the company grows. So I kind of understand that a little bit on the market in the second part, to kind of manage that a bit. But again, my concern is, and you know this better than I do with the numbers, is the compression and how that's going to affect. Have you gotten any feedback, or have you tried to? Are the employees aware of any of this at this point, and any feedback regarding some of these options?
We did not go out and talk about the pay plans. We wanted to visit with council first and see if we needed to adjust based on the interest that we receive from you. We did talk to them about the evaluation and a little bit about the exceptional employee program. And receive feedback, but we did not talk to them about this. It is a concern if the interest is to move them to market, then there has to be a way of to adjust that when they get up to market and over market. The other option is it's a flat, everybody moves through it at whatever rate. You do away with the steps so that you don't have that compression and everybody kind of moves through it based on longevity, and you have the flexibility to determine the rate with which they go through it.
Wally?
Your proposal number 1 would do away with longevity. If you did number 1, everybody moved 2.2%.
Every-
Not this slide, the one before.
Everybody would move 2.2% if that was the amount, and it really would recognize longevity, though, because you're still marching up the
Okay.
up the scale in order. Yes.
Joanne?
I'm just trying to understand a few things. So, a while back when we actually had the comp class study, I want to say that we had, as a council, agreed that we wanted to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, 102% of market. Does that sound correct?
I think
Or
it was
close?
to about 110%.
110%, okay.
And then it's kind of been moving backwards. 'cause
Been
that was
going backwards.
a different era.
Correct. Right. So, so when we say market, we're saying that that's 100%. So, when you say maximum range,
You want a
is that
percentage, huh?
is that 200% or what is maximum range?
Our range are 48%. So if the market's within the middle of that, you're looking at, above market is 24%.
Okay. So, and I don't know if this council has had that discussion. I thought of really saying, where do we want to see, our employees? Is it 110%? I mean, we haven't had that discussion that I know of, or vaguely we've had that discussion. I think that we all are looking at, we need to be a market. We want to be competitive. But is that as important to be at maximum?
We had the paper that was handed out that showed where we have been at market in the past.
Right.
And so it kind of, of course, that varies with the market and where we are financially. So I do remember seeing that, but I don't know, was it this year that I saw that?
No, that's been some time ago. That also showed us at 106% of market, which
That's right.
was
That's
what
right.
council's direction was, I
Yeah.
want to say about 6 years ago.
I was going to say.
And it dropped to 102%. And then most recently, as you talked about, it's 100% of market.
Right. Okay.
So that's 110 went way back. That was a long time ago. That has not been discussed.
But we're
with
talking
council.
about being competitive with the other cities, and so
Right.
Right.
that should be, Joe?
I think the question that Vice Mayor's trying to get to is the maximum range, because most cities, or almost all cities, have a minimum and a maximum. Okay? I mean, that's how they operate. Police, fire, sworn, non-sworn. If you look at our maximum by position, how do we compare? Because I think sometimes it's misleading when you talk about market, because it's an average. It's where they're all fitting in these ranges that all these cities have. So the question is our maximum range that somebody can attain at the upper end? Is it within reason with the others? I mean, is the max has to be adjusted? I mean, you see what I'm kind of getting at? Because I know when you're talking about market, you're talking about an average of somebody that you're taking out there. But all cities that I know of have a beginning and a top, and I don't know of any that don't have a range. So is our range higher, comparable?
We could get you the exact comparisons. Ranges can be any width. I've seen them 30%, 35%, 50%. It really depends on what the philosophy is and how you want to, how wide you want your ranges. So we could look to see if we're at 48%, one of the longer ranges, or the width is greater than other organizations. And you can look at reducing that also compared to others, but 48% is generally right around in there. It's just pretty
The
much.
only reason why I ask is it could be misleading when you have a market and then you have another 9 steps above that says they're 40, 50% above market, where in reality that's the range typically. So I'm not sure, the message of the averages, is kind of getting it across to maybe all on the dais, only because the market is an average, and still you have these lower and upper ranges. I don't want them to think that the maximum range, if we stay with the maximum range, that person's 50% above market.
No.
And again, that's where the vice mayor was coming from, and I knew that's where she
Exactly.
was coming from.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's important that we try to clarify that.
Well, and I'm sorry, and I think as an employee, you would love to know that you're being paid the highest market, but as the city of Goodyear, is that what we want to be saying? That, we pay, 100 and 200% above market to, no. So that's what I'm trying to figure out between how you've had that there. So I appreciate that, Joe.
Thank you for the clarification, definitely. With the non-sworn pay plan, unlike the sworn like to operate off of mins and maxes because they are very step-driven, and they have very minimal steps. With the non-sworn, you tend to see wider ranges and a lot more of the open type of ranges. And we choose the market as a way to compare ourselves, or the midpoint of that, because it really is when someone gets hired, they're not asking you in this area, what's your mins and maxes, and they kind of want to know. They really want to know, am I being paid comparative, to other cities when I go out? And that's why we look at the average salaries as a way. So it is a different approach. There are very different strategies for for sworn and non-sworn.
One more quick question. Okay. So help me out with the compression part again. So if I am, maintenance worker 3, and I've been with the city, 8 years, and I'm being paid, I don't know, $20 an hour. And so new maintenance worker number 3 gets hired, and he gets hired in at 100% market of $24 an hour. Explain again how 8-year-old maintenance worker number 3 is not going to have that compression issue again.
Okay, in that particular example, hopefully we're not bringing someone in at 24 when you've got an 8-year-old employee who's been here for 20. We do look at internal equity.
Clarify.
Yeah, we do look at internal equity, and that is a big consideration when we hire someone in. We look to see where everyone else is in the market. Because we don't, also that could lead to gender issues and all of that. So we do pay attention to that.
Well, I'm just
you're asking,
throwing a scenario, because I don't know that. So.
But you've actually, as part of that question, it's important to answer. If, let's say this quartile 1, let's say your 8-year employee, because we haven't had pay increases, is just into the second quartile, just barely. And then you've got an employee who's in that first quartile, and so as they kind of move through there, one's getting 3% increases, this one's getting 2.5%. Eventually, that one that's in the 3% is going to catch up or come closer to that one because they're getting their pay increases. But once they get into the 2.5%, they're kind of even. Then you get to the other side, and then this person kind of catches up to them because of the different pay increases. So there, you will see some more compression with this because of the rate that they move through the quartiles. And that's why in this one, this is a bigger shift from what we've been doing because it doesn't, while we try to manage the compression, there will be more compression because of the different increases through this. It's more market driven.
It's interesting to listen to the 1 and 2, and more questions have been and more dubious thoughts on this structure too. So is that more than we want to bite off? I mean, is this causing more concerns than the proposal 1? I'm going to get to her in a minute. Every now and then the mayor gets a question in. Not often, but I am now.
Just based on the questions that we've been asked, I would say the option number 1 meets all of your interest and moves you through, except it will not move your employees quicker to market. They will progress at whatever rate is determined or agreed upon through the budget process. That's the only interest that would not be met.
Quicker to market means that you have maybe unhappy employees that start looking around at other cities or other jobs and move on. Is that kind of the synopsis of that?
Yes, we've had about, last year was a little over 10% turnover, and we're trending close to that. Now, once you take out the retirements, we drop down to 7% turnover, but we've lost individuals to other communities. And
obviously, the training cost, too.
The training cost.
We incorporate training back again into the system.
Yes, so as you lose them.
Molly, did you have a question?
I just wanted to know if the amounts that you're using for range, minimum and maximum, were they actual?
That's one actual range.
that actually a city is using those figures for their employees?
We have that's one of our ranges. That's just one of our ranges.
Joanne?
Okay, so I guess and it was been brought up, if we were to look at both of these and bring in the longevity pay, how that changes this look would be something I think I would be interested in seeing. And I guess my question that I'm still, when you said that when you were doing the survey, it was only 14%. How do you actually know then that you have 209 people at 71%? Below market? I mean, it sounds like a guess then to me.
We actually have their actual salaries, and I can put it up here on Elmo if you'd like. It will show you where most of our employees, we have 209 employees that are below market in whatever pay range that they're in. So if you just look at our current actual employees and what they're paid, not comparing it to the salaries out there, we have 209 employees out of 294 who are below market in that first or second quartile. And then the rest of them are above in the third or fourth if we were to break it down into the quartiles. And so,
Joe?
in fact,
No, we're in the health and safety business, okay? Employees, highly skilled, and we're risk adverse, I guess if I'm saying it correctly. Which means if our employees make a mistake, whether it's not filling a pothole, actually doing something either in the fire or the police, it's not an oops. It could be significant amount of cost to the city. So from my perspective, it's a smart business move to make sure, number one, we're competitive and we hire the best and the brightest to mitigate that risk because of the nature of what we do. And I think that's real important because it does get expensive, as we know, if mistakes occur. So what I'm toying about is how do we get to the market so that we don't lose the ones that we don't want to lose. At the same token, how to avoid the compression. And I don't know if what the Vice Mayor had mentioned as far as the longevity addresses that or not, but my concern is the people that you're losing now to others, to other cities and et cetera, is that going to create a problem as far as the pool of employees that we have, of the nature and the technical skills, et cetera, because to me, again, we're in the risk-adverse business. It's very, we're in the safety business, and when mistakes happen, they're not just little oopses. They can be very catastrophic. So that's why I think it's important we maintain and we recruit and we try to get the best and the brightest for what we do. And again, from a business standpoint, to mitigate those risks and to keep costs down from that perspective. So that's where I'm kind of toying in is I don't want to lose the best and the brightest. But again, I'm concerned about the compression, so I'm kind of torn between the one and the two on how we address that. If that if that makes any sense to you.
Yes, Bill, we hear you. You're on.
All right. Sorry, I think there's a little delay, so I try to get in there when I can. I think I couldn't agree more with Joe, and I'm wondering, my suggestion earlier of the longevity, if we don't apply longevity only to those, let me get to the slide, above the market, if that doesn't change those numbers. If instead of across-the-board longevity for a 5-year employee, and I agree with Sherry that that's not really longevity, but if we only apply longevity to the folks that are above market at whatever rates we come up with, then that quote-unquote compression piece starts to move farther down the road, does it not?
You have a good point, and in thinking about that, Councilmember Stepp, if we were to apply longevity at that upper end, what my recommendation would be to make sure we're legal, and we were kind of talking a little bit
I
here.
was watching his head. It wasn't moving
Yeah.
in the right direction.
Oh, I couldn't see it.
Instead of where they were at above market, my recommendation would be change your years of service. Right now we have 5 years of service. Maybe you look at someone who's been here, a longer period of time, whatever number of years that is, and then that you're treating everybody the same, and it's not based on where they're at in the market. It doesn't fully eliminate the possibility of some compression, but it would be more defendable.
Sure, and that's all that I'm suggesting. My concern, and I heard the conversation go back to, well, maybe option one is the best choice. To me, option one is not the best choice. Option two is a stronger approach. It's very recognizable. It's not to the employee. It's different than what we're doing, but it's not too terribly different. And I think we may have a better opportunity for them to get behind that and understand how this quartile scenario might work, as opposed to this giant open range and that there's some variable in there. Number one. Number two is moving people to market is very important. We took very specific steps in the last couple of years to move our sworn positions to market, and in some cases we even, they're over market. And then we're going to take this very large chunk of our employee population, and we're not going to take those same steps. And I think we as a council may be running the risk of being of not applying the rules equally as well, and we can create a problem for the city manager. So I would prefer that we maybe more focus on this option two, and then figure out how to maneuver or redesign, rather, the longevity to fix those compression problems later.
The city manager would like to talk. Brian?
Yes, and let me explain current policy established by council for longevity pay. It's after 5 years of service, you get $100, and then you add $100 every year thereafter. So after 15 years of service, you max out at $1,000 per employee. After that, you cannot get any more. So it does go 100 all the way up to $1,000, and that is for longevity, current policy.
Thank you. Sherry?
Wally's been waiting.
Thank you.
Molly?
I'd like to ask the city manager, because Lynette hasn't been here as long. I haven't been here long. How did we get 200 and some odd employees so below market? What have I missed in this conversation? Because this was going on when I came on council, and I don't understand why we're in this hole.
Best way to approach it, the pay structure itself is what we set up when we go through the compensation plan. And we've gone through this a couple of times. And I think I said it was 4 or 5 years ago when you wanted to be at 106% of market. No, it was almost 10 plus years ago. So forgive that. And then I want to say in the mid-2000s, it's let's be at 102% of market. And the thought was let's hire the best and the brightest, and be and we want to be able to do that vis-a-vis the salaries that we provide to them. Structure has basically worked. The challenge that really where our system is hurt is in 2008 we suspended merit increases. In July 2008, we provided a 1% market adjustment, which was just not to base. That was strictly as a lump sum. And then after that, we have not been able to fund any of the merit increases. So that's what happens when you are not providing merit increases along the way. Regardless of what structure you have in place, if you're not feeding it, it will change. The other is, as we look at the, I do want Lynette to just talk briefly about how we actually look at what the market is. There's a lot of work on the part of staff, and I would argue that we do a very, very thorough job. We make sure we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And I know it's an exhaustive effort on the part of the staff to look at those 39 benchmark positions. So while we're, and just recently is when they did the latest review of where we're at with market, we were aware last year when those numbers came in, 89% for non-exempt, and we came in at around 94% for exempt. We were aware. Council did approve a 2.5%, which went to base last year for non-sworn. So we've tried to work toward that. We're getting closer. As you'll see the numbers now, we're still not there. So we've been working toward it, but with the Great Recession, it's hard to catch up.
Sherry?
This actually kind of plays on what Brian just said. With the brackets, how often do we go in and fix, like adjust the market, adjust the minimum, adjust the maximum so that we are competitive with those specific job categories like 2980? When do we go back in and how often do we go back and say, okay, the maintenance worker 3 how often do we look at those benchmarks to keep our midpoint or our market at market? So
Every
we know
year.
So every year we're going to go adjust these ranges. So it doesn't necessarily adjust at a 2.2, doesn't change the maximum range up to 2.2.
We look at this every year. So we go out and we survey those benchmark jobs and to make sure that our market is comparable, and is in line with the average salaries that are being paid out there. Now, if the market shifts and we start to see a change, we would recommend moving the pay range. And so the market would move to the new whatever the average salary is, and that whole thing shifts. It's a complicated process because it's not just one job that drives that. You have to look at multiple jobs within that pay grade because there might be more than one job that is a benchmark job. And so you want to make sure that sometimes you do have one that you start to see move and they're moving and they're moving, and maybe that's a time we need to put them in a different pay grade because they are just moving quickly. And it wasn't that long ago we had that happening with IT. And you were just paying for those individuals, and you had to increase those salaries. So we look at this every year. Right now, I would say, based on our current study, we wouldn't recommend moving the ranges. The ranges are fine. Where we've got market at is fine. It's where our employees are within those pay ranges, because we haven't been able to give pay increases over the past few years, that they're behind the market. And the market.
I just wondered if they keep bumping up, our people keep hitting further on this way if the market keeps going to the right.
Yes, but right now I would say our structure and the market and the average salaries out there are good. I would not recommend moving that. It's more of a process of how we move them through the range. If next year we do this study and we find that the market has moved, we'll come back and suggest a change in that depending on how far we're falling behind there. And
Joanne?
Well, I was just going to say, I have to agree with Bill that I feel that option 2 really does move us in the right direction and a little more aggressively. And I also agree that we did for the sworn, we need to do for the non-sworn and keep it consistent. So I just wanted to voice my opinion on that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Joe?
No, I'm on the same page as both the Vice Mayor and Bill. My concern is only on how we address the compression, and then possibly how we address that compression is through the longevity. Maybe you need to rethink that. And I'm no lawyer, but I'm guessing that you want to be consistent, so you're probably going to have to change the period instead of just say everybody above the market line. Am I correct on that, Rourke? That probably won't fly.
Councilmember Pizzoli, yeah, I think that's correct. You're going to get challenges if you're not applying it consistently. That's what we're kind of touching on. If you're going to apply it over the whole scale, do you have to go back and survey each position on an annual basis? So that going to the years of service may work better.
I think that's a good
Yeah. The only thing I feel strong about is because of the nature of the service we provide and what happens when we have the wrong people doing the wrong job. It's important we have the right people doing the right job. And remember that old advertisement a while back, pay me now, pay me later? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it costs a lot less to get the right people in now than down the road when the oops happens. So I think it's important that we get to the market on this.
Are there any more questions? Okay, thank you very much. Are you finished with all that you have to tell us, or you still have a little bit more to go?
Oh, we still have the evaluation
Right, well,
and
let's go
the
with it.
exceptional employee program. And I'm going to turn the mic now and the keyboard over to Sandra Healy, and she is going to discuss with you the performance process improvement for evaluations and the tool.
Thank you, Wynette. She asked me to take some notes for her. She started to freak out a little bit when she saw how much I had written down. I have little stars next to the things that I think we need to follow up on. It gives me great pleasure to be before you today to tell you about the progress we've been making on the performance appraisal process. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've gotten to where we are and how we are trying to meet your interests as a council with our proposal. In November of 2011, you let Wynette know that you'd like us to look at the performance appraisal, and as a result of that input, we put together a performance evaluation team. We had representatives from all of the departments participate except for IT. IT was in the middle of some big projects at the time and was unable to participate. We did come out with some recommendations from the performance evaluation team, which we also took around the city to employee meetings to get additional feedback. We also delivered the proposals to the leadership team and incorporated all of the feedback that we got from the employee meetings, the performance evaluation team, and the leadership team in what you're going to see tonight. When you visited with us in November of last year, you let us know that you were particularly interested in a performance appraisal that's legally defensible. You will see that we have some consistent elements in our performance appraisal which will help us avoid any kind of liability. You also told us you wanted an appraisal that clearly defines expectations, and we will give you some examples of how we are plainly describing behaviors that we will be looking for that indicate performance. You also wanted to recognize the diversity of jobs within the city. You didn't want a cookie-cutter appraisal. You wanted something that was very specific. And to meet your interest in this area, we're going to show you how we customize performance categories based on the employee's job duties and the department's priorities. You also let us know that you'd like a rating system that better differentiates performance between employees and reduces biased evaluations, and we'll show you how we plan to accomplish that. And finally, you wanted a basis for a monetary increase and a mechanism to address truly exceptional performance. This was partially addressed by Wynette in the pay structure proposal, and she will also be getting back to you after I'm finished with a truly exceptional performer proposal. And I'm also open to questions as we move along. I know sometimes I don't take a breath. On the customized appraisal based on the job/position, we have two basic categories in our performance appraisal proposal, a citywide category and departmental level categories. The citywide performance category will be customer service. That's why we exist, to provide service to customers, and we want all employees to be appraised on whether they meet defined standards of customer service, so that area will be very specific. The second main area is the departmental level performance categories. We have several on here that we are proposing, which are communication, managerial and supervisory, which would apply only to people in supervisory roles, personal leadership, teamwork, technical and physical expertise, and work habits/professionalism. These category headings would be the same for all employees in all departments. However, they could be customized based on the person's specific job functions. And this is how we meet your interest of recognizing all of the diversity in the city. We are recommending that we move to a meets or does not meet rating system. Currently we have a 3-level rating system, and the perception has become that successful, which is our middle rating, is unsatisfactory. So we propose to moving to a standard where we either meet or do not meet standards. And by moving to this overall rating and removing the middle rating, we are also removing the stigma of being just successful. And we're also emphasizing the notion that meeting standards is the expectation for all employees. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be customizing these performance categories. These are the areas that will help determine an employee's strengths and identify their improvement opportunities. So how do we get to an overall rating of meets or does not meet? I'd like to show you an example on the Elmo. Lainey, if you could pull that up. Is that as,
Can you? Yeah.
Blow it up.
Can you enlarge that at all?
how do I blow it up?
Even with my glasses.
Whoa, there we go.
All right, thanks.
I have here an example of communication. As I said, the performance category would be the same for all departments, but it could be customized based on the essential functions for the employee. So I mocked up an example. This is just a sample of what a public information officer could potentially have in their performance category under communication. We might evaluate this person based on whether they can speak effectively in public and at press conferences and to reporters. On our performance appraisal, we are also recommending that we have a specific definition of what does not meet standards, so that a supervisor in evaluating an employee would be able to look right at this and know whether it was meeting standards or not meeting standards for this employee. We also have an example under Public Information Officer that the person would be able to write press releases in a specific format with correct spelling and grammar, and if they did not do that, then they would not be meeting standards. The communication category would be defined or customized differently for a staff assistant. In this area, a staff assistant might need to state the name and the department when they answer the call, a phone call. They might need to direct phone calls appropriately. We're looking for listening actively and being able to paraphrase effectively. But this is just an example of what it would look like customized for different positions. So a supervisor would go through here and mark whether a person met expectations or did not meet expectations, and those would be factored together with weighting. Each department is going to be weighting categories depending on how important that category is for a specific position. For example, a public information officer, sorry, yes, question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sherry, I was...
Yeah, sure.
And I noticed there's going to be training. I like this. I like what you're doing, but I just have a question. Are we also going to, as part of the training, train our supervisors to not wait until the performance evaluation, but document?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
All of a sudden, everybody's walking around with a clipboard. What's he doing? I know what he's doing.
Yes, definitely we are making that a critical component of our training, of how to identify that behavior, how to document that behavior, and how to have conversations about that behavior throughout the rating period.
They're not blindsided when they get this and say, oh, I don't meet, really.
Correct. In fact, when we presented our proposal to the 10 employee meetings throughout the city, we emphasized the fact that this is a documentation tool, not a communication tool. This is not something you present to an employee where they learn of things for the first time. That's where the conversations come in. I think I'm ready to go back to the PowerPoint, if you would, Lainey. That's so cool. All right. So to get the overall percentage, as I showed you, we would have marking for meeting standards or not meeting standards. Based on how much that item was weighted would give us an overall percentage. An overall percentage between 76% and 100% would result in an overall rating of meeting standards, which would be our expectation. Since an employee will be evaluated on dozens of items, upwards of 70, in fact, it could be. We had one for the police officers mocked up. It is possible for an employee to not meet standards on individual performance items and still meet standards overall.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sherry?
I know a lot of our eyes went wide when you said over 70. Is that a lot or is that common? Because I never remember having that many performance reviews, but is that where it's going? Is that common?
Yeah, 70 is not, it's not going to be the standard for all employees. However, we are looking for specific items that go with the person's job description, with the specific items that go with the department. We don't feel like this is going to be lengthening the process at all because it's eliminating a lot of the narrative that we heard feedback from employees was taking up the most time. How do I define customer service? To me, it looks this way. To another supervisor, it looks a different way. So I have to justify it in writing, and maybe I do it well, maybe I don't do it well. So this is more objective.
Jennifer?
I too had the big eyes when I heard the 70 number. Will this be more time consuming for managers, supervisors?
We do not believe so.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely not.
Sandra?
Yes, Bill?
Thank you, Mayor. One, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think practice and what we actually think are two different things. Is there a way to incorporate in this when someone does not meet standards, that that supervisor is required to document the times or not the times, but the dates or conversations or something to indicate that this isn't the first time an employee is hearing that? Has that been discussed?
Councilmember Stipp, this is Wynette. That can be a component of this. We can add a requirement where they document that they have had those conversations. We're also going to be reviewing. There is in the form we'll have a space for them to write comments down, and we will be reviewing them and making sure that things are, trying to make things consistent. Also, I wanted to mention when Councilmember Barber brought up the length of it, we are wanting to move towards an electronic type of version, so it calculates. So they go in and they mark this, and it calculates for them. It's not done on paper. We'll have to do it kind of patch it together until we get our new enterprise-wide system, and then that will be a component that we'll look for in that new system.
Okay, I do have a follow-up question.
Yes, Bill?
Okay. I am concerned about the length, but I guess because I'm not seeing what you have there in front of you. So my understanding that there will be a number of checkboxes with either meets or does not meet, and there will be less narrative written or expected from the supervisor. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, we have no narrative required from the supervisor. The items, based on being customized, of course, for the department and the essential functions, will be very objective, easily identifiable. You either are or you aren't. So by that token, it will be easier to go through and much quicker to identify whether an employee is meeting or not meeting standards.
Okay, which I'm very happy to hear. But I just will repeat, if we hire good people, and if they're not meeting the standard, I think, especially given our track record of what we have gone through in the past, several years, if we've got somebody not meeting it, I think we've got to have, there's got to be a narrative explanation in there. As opposed to just a check mark and then moving on. And if the employee is truly just hearing about it for the first time in that performance appraisal, it probably sounds like they don't have a very good relationship with that supervisor, and they're going to be reluctant to put their comments on that form. And I think we make it the supervisor's responsibility to identify that and say, on this day we said this, on this day you did that, and then let the employer refute it, or they own it.
Yes, thank you for that feedback, Bill. And as Wynette did mention, HR will be providing oversight for these appraisals. And I'm getting to it in just a moment, but we're going to be adding an additional performance conversation requirement. So not only would a supervisor be going through here and indicating when a person does not meet standards, but there is a requirement for the supervisor to provide coaching for any areas where the employee does not meet standards. HR would be looking for those areas and figuring out what kind of opportunities we have to intervene or provide training, anything that's appropriate. Thank you, Bill. And so upwards of 70, which is, it might not be 70 for any particular employee. It could be far fewer. It'll depend on what the department needs and what the essential functions are. So if an employee does not meet expectations, that would mean they got an overall percentage of 75% or less, and a performance plan would be required, and the employee would have 90 days to meet standards. This is our current practice. When a person does not meet standards, they need a performance plan and would have 90 days to meet standards. Now, we will need a score in order to determine whether an employee is meeting standards or not meeting standards. However, we are not recommending that this overall percentage is visible to the supervisor or the employee, so that after going through the appraisal and marking meets or does not meet, it would give you just an overall rating of meets or does not meet for that particular employee.
But then the training kicks in. Then
Oh, sure. We need 2 microphones.
Yes, the training kicks in, and the idea is not to pit employees against each other. It's not about the score. You meet or you don't. It's about an environment where we encourage development and coaching and having these conversations, and not, I got an 89, you got a 93. We had to draw some line in the sand as to when you do not meet expectations. And at that point, I wanted to add also, if you do not meet expectations and receive that 75% or less, you do not get the pay increase. Mm-hmm. So we have talked about separating the pay from the performance evaluation, but in this particular instance, we had to tie it at least to this because you did not meet standards in this case.
Jennifer?
How many times a year would supervisors have these conversations with employees, and when is a final percentage given? Is that at the end of the year to determine their pay raise for the next year, or?
Right. The additional performance conversation would only be required one additional time, so that a conversation would be happening twice per year for the employee. We were aware of not putting too much of a burden on the supervisor or the employee to get together and meet, while still emphasizing in training that that is the point of this. The appraisal is to develop these coaching opportunities and help the person give their best performance. And I'm going to move this map over here. So we're thinking that this overall percentage moving to a meets or does not meet standard, the customization of the performance standards, and our proposal for these individual type items is going to help us avoid inflated assessments. This critical shift puts emphasis on performance, not a score, as Wynette was mentioning. And the area closest to my heart, training. As I just said to Jen, the purpose of the appraisal is to help employees identify their strengths and the areas that they need improvement on, so we can coach them to provide the best possible customer service and the best possible job performance. And while many organizations might separate employees from their supervisors while giving them training in a system like this, we propose that supervisors and employees receive the same training at the same time to ensure consistency and accountability.
Very good.
Trainees will be introduced to the performance categories, much like the ones that we developed as our sample for the PIO or the staff assistant. They'll be introduced to the definitions of behavior that meet the standards, what performance conversations can and should look like. They'll be introduced to the idea of aligning their roles with Goodyear priorities, documentation, and how to use the appraisal to identify ways to develop themselves. We will be emphasizing that employees are accountable for their own performance, and while supervisors are obviously responsible for documenting and coaching, this is a two-way street, that employees and supervisors will work together in order to improve their job performance, continue job performance to get where they need to be. What we are attempting here is an organizational culture change. And training, while one component, is not the only answer. More than likely, even Wynette and I may have some areas where we need improvement. Knowing these areas that we need improvement in is a good thing, very good thing, because knowing about it means we can do something about it. And so that is the cultural shift that we will be emphasizing, that will come out in this intestinal fortitude description that I know you guys have heard before. And, of course, since the rating only delivers a meets or does not meet rating, supervisors should not have any reason to inflate their assessment. So, in summary, we discussed our proposal to meet your interests in the area of appraisals. We recommend that we have a customized appraisal based on the job, that we move to a meets standard or does not meet standard rating. We will develop an overall percentage based on the rating. However, this will only result in an overall meets or does not meet. And we will emphasize training while recognizing that training is not the only way we change the culture. And in a moment, after I answer any questions you may have, Wynette will be getting us back to show you how we're going to provide a monetary basis for, a basis for monetary increase and the exceptional performer proposal. Questions?
Any questions? Wally?
So, the way you've laid this out is that if I, as an employee, reach 76 or higher percent, and I meet the standards, then I would be eligible to move right on up the pay scale.
Correct. If you got 75% or less, you would not be eligible for any kind of pay increase that council authorized.
All right. So I am trained again, and I am doing a better job. And when do I find out if I pass again? I have to wait another year?
Yes. That's our current, that's what we're looking at right now.
Our current evaluation process is on a yearly basis, so I want to make sure I understand your question.
Well, I'm just concerned if we have, apparently we don't have a lot of employees, I'm assuming, that do not meet the standards. Otherwise, they would have been dealt with. So those that are going forward, if they don't meet the standards and then they're trained, do we have a mechanism by which, after they're trained, they might get another evaluation saying, yes, they're now up to standards, so that they know they've gotten the training, whatever they were doing wrong, they're now doing right, and they're doing a better job? They don't have to wait for a whole year to know that they're better?
They have, under our current process, and in this proposed one, they will be put on a performance improvement plan and have 90 days to improve. And then that can be evaluated at that time based on...
So 90 days are either good and they're good to stay on the payroll, or they're out.
Or they...
Okay.
Yes.
Joanne?
I just like to say I'm very impressed with what you've put together. I think it's very thorough, organized, and from what I can tell right now, you're hitting all the bases and the challenges that we were seeing, and I congratulate you for that. And I'm glad that we have Sandra back for training, and that going forward, this looks like this is going to be a great deal. So I appreciate it.
Joe?
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate the effort. But I also, on the training of the supervisors, documentation. So, I don't want the employees to be surprised on anything. I know they have goals and objectives that they have on their performance. All of them do, or they should all do. And there's nothing worse than having a supervisor coming back to you the day of the review and says, oh, by the way, no. They stay in contact, and if there's an issue, they keep open lines of communication with their employees, so there's no surprises for them.
Sherry?
I too like it, and I agree with the documentation prong. I think the training is essential. For the employees, it kind of, while it was making me think about this, you're going to have coaching and stuff on the way, but is there any midpoint review? Just maybe not the 74, slots, but is there any midpoint meeting that's going to be a part of this, so we know if someone's really starting to get off that track, or is there a midpoint?
Yes, and I refer to it as a performance conversation. We're keeping it informal, but yes, that would be required at midpoint or somewhere around there. We didn't want it to be too rigid for a supervisor, but again, we don't want them to wait till the 9th month and have that and then evaluate them 3 months later. But that performance conversation documentation would also be coming back with the appraisal for HR oversight. And to get back to Joe's point, I certainly don't want to become the police department in HR, and yet I look at that as a coaching opportunity for a supervisor. If we see an appraisal come in that has does not meet, and I look at it and think, wow, I never would have suspected this employee, or I thought this employee wasn't meeting, and here they are marked as meeting, that's an opportunity for me or somebody in HR as a business partner to follow up with the supervisor.
That's what I like about the program. It's on both parties, on the supervisor and on the employee. And part of it is that we really don't want to see people walk out the door.
No,
we want
don't.
them to improve. And so many times in life, you do your job, and all of a sudden you get out of track, right? You decide you're going to do it your way, and all of a sudden you see your way isn't the right way. And so sometimes you have to get back on that path again, and I think this is a great road to it. And I love the presentation, and just like all the council said, it has exactly the points that we talked about previous to this time. So good job.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Okay.
I do want to recognize the work of the PET, or the Performance Evaluation Team. They put a lot of hours into it, and some of them are in the audience, not everybody here, and I so appreciate. And I also want to recognize Officer Joe Pacello, because he provided us a template for the police officers on how to kind of set this up. So it was a team effort on this, so I want to thank everyone for that. All right, if we're ready, we're going on to the final component of this, and that is the program to recognize the truly exceptional employees. As you might recall, when we last met and we looked at the data, 66% of our employees were exceptional, and that's wonderful. But you had asked for us to look at a way to recognize the truly exceptional employees. And so your other interest was that it be a meaningful recognition, and that it's a program for those employees who go above and beyond. And approximately 10% of our employees instead of 66% of our employees is kind of the number you were looking at. So with the Goodyear, we're calling it the Goodyear Excellence Award. This program was also designed by the Performance Evaluation Team, and they did want a completely separate program. So employees recognized for meritorious performance, and a description here of what that would look like is results delivered that are beyond what normally expected, extraordinary displays of our values, extraordinary performance and technical physical expertise, work habits, professionalism, leadership, teamwork, communication, public service, and our management and supervision. They are documented performance consistently above and beyond. Full-time and regular part-time employees would be eligible for this program. And when I say part-time, those are the benefited part-time that are budgeted for. And employees who have the opportunity to be recognized within this program must meet expectations at the 90% level in both the citywide and the department competencies. So that is a tall order, because there are multiple competencies being evaluated, and they must meet expectations at the 90% level in both the citywide and the department competencies. As for the process, any city employee can nominate another city employee, but it must go through the department director for review of that nomination, and a final review by department city managers and the city manager before an employee is recognized as the truly exceptional employee. A maximum of 10% of the employees or the city's authorized positions would be recognized. So there would be a cap on this. The award amount, we are recommending that a percentage go to base for the non-sworn, and you'll see that there's a lump sum there, because the recommendation for the award to base would be 2% to base. So that would be our recommendation, and since the sworn are on 5% steps, we can't add 2% to base. So it would be a lump sum for the sworn if we choose to go with the 2% to base as a recognition. The cost to the city for the non-sworn ongoing at a 2% would be $42,970, and the sworn one time would be $25,500. So ongoing would be approximately $43,000. We also think.
I just have a quick question. What happens, because we're just looking at the step, that one worker range you had there. What happens if you're the 29, the last guy on the step? If you're there, does it still go to your base and you're just out of step, or what happens?
You get lump sum.
Okay.
And that's what happens every year. So thank you. We forgot to mention, if you're at the top of the range, you're at that $29.80, and you approve a 2.2% pay increase, that employee would get 2.2% a lump sum.
So they don't forego it, they still get it.
They still get something. And we'd recommend, just to make it even with the third and fourth quartile, probably a 2.5 or something lump sum, because then that would match the third and fourth quartile numbers in that. And then we would also recommend recognition by mayor and council at a meeting for those employees.
On the 10%, how are you going to do that? You're going to look at it as a whole population, or you're going to break it down by, I guess, deputies? because you got some departments that 10% would be a half a body, and I don't want you cutting anybody in half on that deal. So, I mean, you got to have a bigger population in some departments to get that 10%. So I assume you figured out a way that there are some departments, as long as you don't go over the 10%, that may have, and then it's going to be screened as it makes its way up to the deputies and to the city manager, et cetera.
Right. We want to represent all of the departments fairly, but we also, the goal of this is to recognize the truly exceptional
Right,
employees. And some, if we were to go with 10%, like in my department, that would mean one person. But if you have a smaller department, like I think the clerk's office, then you're looking at 3/4, a half a person.
Right.
We don't, yeah, no.
Okay. So you're going to have a larger population.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? Well, I think you have a satisfied council here.
All right, if you don't mind, I'd like to summarize what I heard so I can make
Absolutely.
sure that the direction is correct. And what I heard on the pay options on the structures, I believe that option number 2, look at addressing the compression through a revamped, revised longevity program based on years of service.
I see just a nod of heads. Yes. You're correct in that assumption.
Okay. And then on the performance evaluation, there was a direction for a place for narrative where we document coaching and prior performance discussions, and especially if there's a does not meet standards, why is it that isn't, if that's not clear, that there's a place for a narrative there. And in training, documentation.
You better do it because you have Joe after you all the time coming up with that.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I'm
Joanne?
sorry. Back to the very beginning. Maybe I didn't hear you. The longevity issue you were going to bring back to us too. I don't know if you said that. Maybe you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we'll look at revamping that,
Okay,
the
thank you.
longevity to address some of the issues with individuals above market in that slower progression there, and see how we can handle that. And longevity would be one time, probably, not into base, so that kind of helps. But we'll look at the years of service. For the Goodyear Excellence Award, it sounds like we're on the right track. Our recommendation as far as the award amount, good?
Well, if we have the money.
Yeah. It's always dependent on budget.
Yes, if we
Very
don't
good.
have the money, we may have to revisit it.
Okay. But budget dependent, I should add
But,
that.
yeah,
budget.
based on budget,
Okay.
will be set during our budget. What do you think?
Yeah, I would
Because
think
either,
that-
yeah.
I think that's what we would have to do. We have a program for it.
Right.
So I think that discussion should take place then.
Okay.
Everybody agree with that? Yes. Okay.
Well, those are the notes. Sandra has a lot of comments here, but as far as follow-up and our direction, I believe that's a summary for tonight. I really appreciate your time. We love talking about this, and thank you for your direction.
Quite welcome. Thank you. I have a question to ask. We still have one more presentation. Should we take it, or do we go into the other meeting and then come back to it? How is?
The meeting is posted immediately following the work session, so
Okay.
if council does, if you want to break, that's fine, otherwise this
No.
presentation should
Let's
be.
just continue, right?
Yes.
Let's continue with it. We're here. So then, well, I can't guarantee you how long it's going to be, Wally. We're on item B, briefing on growth and infrastructure model used when planning for new development. Jack Friedline, interim deputy city manager, to present.
And Mayor and members of the council, before Jack starts, I do want to just recognize him for the contributions he's made to the organization. We drug Jack out of retirement, and he so badly wants to get back to retirement, so he has graciously agreed to stay here until January 3rd. My promise to him is we need to let him go and enjoy what he worked so hard for so many years to get to. That being said, what you're going to hear tonight is a big change with how we approach development. My mic's going in and out. Let's try and get a little closer. So what you're going to hear tonight is we're very excited about this new approach.
Bad mic. You
I
better
do.
change that. Yeah.
So now I also double as the attorney for the rest of the night. I just wanted to warn you. But again, what you'll see tonight is a big change from our old way of doing business, where a lot of the large developments were done by contract or development agreement. So with that, a lot of kudos to Jack and the team that he assembled to make this possible. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Brian. And boy, I'm super excited to be here too, Mayor and City Council. I don't think I'll take too much time, and I'll try to keep it at the 10,000 foot level. But we'd just like to share with you this evening a little bit of the work that we've done as staff in what we call modeling for growth, and it's really a performance-based model for the city. Let's see if I can. I'm rather challenged with this. Let's see. Okay, there we are. I think the message, a couple of messages. One is if we watch the economy nationally and we look at it even in the metro area, we need to poise ourselves ready for growth. It's coming. You can already see that it's happening in the East Valley, and I can tell you the good news is landowners and developers are knocking at our door, and they're asking us if we're ready. This just shows the projections for population. It's projected using MAG numbers and our experts in-house, give or take about a 6% growth in population, and that's just up to FY25. If you look at it long term, this city is going to be a lot larger than 500,000 population. I would say the message about Goodyear is we're all about growth. We're only, we're less than 10% built out, and this is a good depiction of where growth is, where we have built out. North of I-10, we're more than half built out. If you just drove around our city, it's pretty obvious where it is. A lot of growth is going to happen between I-10 and the Gila River. We're only 35% built out. And as you go south and all the way down to County Route 238, you can see that there's not a lot of growth, but it will come.
Percentage there.
It's less than 1%, absolutely. And in the past, typically our financing methods for infrastructure and pretty much focus on water and wastewater infrastructure. When we develop, typically we require the developers to build our street system and transportation system. But in the past, we've really depended on development agreements, CFDs, Community Facility District, and I know you're all very familiar with those, and also development impact fees. Some of the information that lends itself towards a prediction that growth is on the way is on this graph. All the way to the far right shows from in 2012 that that graph is going up, and I would tell you that it's going to go up even more rapidly. I think our estimate was for this fiscal year about 600 permits for homes, and we're going to go very close to 1,100. So again, growth is on the way. And with that, as I said before, our development community has approached us. We've been proactive with them. We had a great meeting with what we call the West Goodyear Group, a group that at one point had 16 development agreements. Some continue to want to grow, others want to stay on the sidelines, and we had at least 6 of those areas represented at the end of September. And it was a very interesting meeting for me. They did a lot of work for us. They put together an engineering report that dealt with the infrastructure solutions for water and wastewater. And they also were kind enough to share with us how we could finance that. And for me, it was a kind of a different paradigm. I was very unused to people telling me how I should structure and build my infrastructure and also how I should finance it. But it was enlightening for me, and I thought to myself, what we need to do is meet with all the expert staff that we have, and we truly do, and take a look at how we should model for growth. Using the information that the developers gave us, which was very informative and important, I first sat with our finance department and took a look at their modeling for growth with reference to projected growth and impact fees. And I saw that a lot of the things that we had projected with reference to infrastructure growth obviously didn't happen since 2007. So we needed to not only update but upgrade this model so we could use it, one, to reflect reality, and two, to use this model to develop the what-ifs. If somebody comes here and says, I'd like to bring an industry in that's going to do such and such in this geographic location. So we put together a virtual team of your experts, planning, development services folks, finance, budget, capital improvements administrator, our new water resources manager, our folks in environmental services that oversee water and wastewater operations, and of course our engineering department that builds it for us. And from that we developed a very reiterative process, beginning, if you look at this chart, and I think this is this reflects the model. This is the model that's going to allow us to, one, decide what we have to build when and what our cash flow is. And it all starts with growth projections. And we have some experts in planning that can tell us right down to the subdivision what they think is going to happen. And we also add into that a certain amount of industrial and commercial growth that we predict that will happen also. And with that comes impact fees. So from those growth projections, we also project the cash flow that we're going to have to cover water and wastewater infrastructure.
Joe?
Yes.
Just a quick, maybe assume's the wrong word, but there are some developers in which have prepaid for these impact fees, so that as you build your model on as new permits come on board, you're not getting any money because the money coming in is going back. I assume that's built into your model?
It's absolutely built into the model.
I just want to make sure.
Yes, reimbursements are in there, prepaids.
Okay.
It's absolutely in the model. It's a great model. So from that, you get a cash flow, and of course, you start with the beginning fund balance, and then you ask our water resources person, do we have the water for this? Number one, in our portfolio, what's approved by EDWR, and then also, do we really have the molecules, as Mark says, to be able to accommodate this? And then, of course, after that, it talks about, well, how do we service these areas with water, be it transmission lines, treatment, wells to pump it from the aquifer, and also wastewater. How do we collect it, bring it to our water reclamation plants, and then when we have it there, will we reclaim it and inject it back into our aquifer or use it for some of our irrigation needs? And from that model, what you'll have then is projected cash flow, the amount of money you're going to bring into the system, the cost of infrastructure, and then the bottom line, what's left. And I would tell you the assumption that we needed CFDs to fund this bothered me because when we did the math on impact fees and we looked at what we get per say residential unit and did some of the math, I wondered if we really did need that. And I would tell you that when we put this model together and we looked at our cash flow, we do in fact have the money to take care of this based on our impact fees, even with the reimbursements from past development agreements. That being said, I understand why a long time ago we used CFDs. It's hard to carry the cost for something for infrastructure to be in front of development if you don't have a lot of infrastructure to begin with, and that's understandable. But I think we're at a point now in our systems, even though we're still small relative to many of the cities in the valley, that we can do this. So we had many meetings actually with the developers to talk about this, and I think we got them off the paradigm of the CFDs, I hope, and we told them, matter of fact, our last meeting we had to tell them about 6 times, we can cover it. But with that, and what you've done, has helped us with reference to our subdivision regulations, with reference to when somebody gets a plat approved by the city council, they actually have to record it within a certain amount of time, 90 days. And then once they've recorded it, they actually have to start construction on that within 180 days. And what that does for our model, it gives us confidence that that is going to happen and the cash flow will be there to be able to fund our infrastructure. And going forward, there's a couple of things that are very interesting for us. As I said before, we'll continually update this model. It is proactive. We can sit with any developer that wants to come into Goodyear and begin to build. We are updating our 2007 water waste.
Joanne?
Yes.
Just a quick, I don't know if it's question or comment, but this type of, how do you call it, model, seems to me that if we can stick with this, we will have smarter growth, and we won't necessarily have some kind of leapfrog development. Would you concur with that? Because you say any developer can come in and have that discussion with us, but if we truly adhere to the way that this model is put together, some of that's not going to work on leapfrog development. So,
well, I think that's the good news, that the model probably can't accommodate a developer who wants to develop 6 miles away from any of our infrastructure. But really, I think what draws on smart growth is adherence to our general plan, and it's being updated, and all the other two plans, of course, that we're putting together. Indeed, though, we can sit with anybody and use the model. So I think that's what's important. And I think what the model does, it brings together the diverse experts in the city to discuss and talk about this, and at the same time, being proactive in discussing this using the model with developers and landowners really helps the city of Goodyear to get a better understanding of where they are short-term and long-term. So we are going to update our water and wastewater master plans very quickly within the next 6 weeks to make sure that the hydraulics work with reference to all the projects that we're going to build.
Excuse me, Joe has a question.
Yes, Joe.
Just real quick in the model, I know the groundwater replenishment district costs are going to start to skyrocket. Am I not correct, Mark, down the road? So in your model, I assume you're going to have some type of transition, because that's kind of goes on the property tax, but the costs to our citizens will start to skyrocket if we don't wean ourselves off and take some of the CAP water. So I assume you're putting some projections in your model.
Yes,
That's, I assume is expensive to do that.
In the model, I would tell you our first 5 years are fine with reference to pulling the water out of our aquifer, but they are not after that. And Mark has done just an awesome job of beginning to update us on where we need to be. And down there, I said develop proposals to bring CAP water to Goodyear, short-term and long-term. And short-term, we mean within 5 or 6 years, we need to bring CAP water in here. We have over 17,000 acre-feet available for us. Today, we use less than 10,000 acre-feet total in our water district. So you can see the capabilities of bringing surface water in. Secondly, the surface water, the CAP water, is the cheapest to treat. It has it's the type of water that doesn't need RO plants or arsenic treatment and things of that nature. Very cheap to treat. And Mark, over the next few months, we'll have workshops and talk about short-term, long-term with reference to this. But we have basically two 5-year segments to this model right now. And again, the first 5 years opens the doors and says, come build. The second 5-year model has the challenges with reference to what Mark is going to pull together over the next 3 months and show you.
And I'm interested in seeing that, because I know our long-term survivability is going to be the CAP and how we fund it. So I'd be curious to see the money, the financing, how that's going to work. That does not put a significant burden on our current residents through rate structures and things like that. So to me, that's very important as well. So I look forward to those work sessions in the future, Mark.
Mayor?
I guess the last.
Yes, Bill?
Sorry, Jack, I have a similar question. And it was hard for me to pick this up, so I may have this wrong as well. You had said that we are going to essentially front the money for some of those additional distribution systems that are going to be basically reimbursed with impact fees. Is that how I got that?
No, what I said was when we project growth out, which comes with impact fees, we have the impact fees in place to be able to fund the projects that we have programmed in to accommodate water and wastewater.
Okay. So the part about the CFD not being needed?
Let me, if I think there's a place for CFDs, but I think it's with reference to developments that I'll call them over the top, that have amenities that people want and they're willing to pay extra for, and they know that when they pay their yearly taxes that this is something over and above, and I think the basics that you are supposed to be provided at the municipal level ought to be in the price of the house and not an extra tax over and above, especially if you look across the street and your neighbor is not in a CFD and they're paying X amount of dollars less a year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Okay, so then my ultimate question or concern is, does this do anything to us that will limit or inhibit or handcuff us from being able to purchase additional CAP water rights? Are we committing anything to it that we have to think about holding a pot of cash to do anything as we go forward?
I think what this model does, maybe for the first time, it shows us we have the money to build what we need, and we don't have to mortgage our future with development agreements that have reimbursements in them for the next 20 years. What we do with reference to the CAP, purchase of future water allocations, and the dollars to bring this surface water down to Goodyear, I think is a whole nother issue that we're going to have to look at with the assistance of Mark Holmes and Jerry Postman and many others in our finance department to develop a model that allows us to get it here. Because I would tell you that there's no any other alternative is extremely expensive or non-existent. So
Sure.
our focus really needs to be, how do we get CAP water to Goodyear?
But this will not do anything that's going to inhibit that.
No, it does not.
Okay, that's all. That was ultimately what I was getting at. Thank you.
And I would just add one more dot point to this with reference to our water portfolio, is we really need to explore every recharge, water reclamation and recharge opportunity we can, because that's putting water back in the bank for us to be able to use in the future also.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other question?
No, I appreciate the effort because it's modeling, for a guy who's a numbers guy, it's one of those things. But anyway, I appreciate the modeling and the effort because there's nothing better than to know, and again, right data, good data, and I'm looking forward, to the CAP discussion on the groundwater replacement district on the funding. And again, I would rather do it that way than have the rebates and the reimbursements, which gets kind of complicated and also squeezes our resources when we do that as well. We're still living through some of those now, so anything we can do to try to move forward on that, especially when the growth takes off, and we know it is. I mean, it's coming here. It's just a matter of when. So I appreciate those efforts. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A great presentation, and it's going to be nice because it shows that we put our best foot forward in moving our city on, and I think we're going to get some really genuinely high-class development in our city because of this. Thank you. All right. I'm going to decide to take a break before we have the meeting, so I'll adjourn this meeting and tell me, do you need 5, 10? 5 minutes? All right. This meeting's adjourned. We'll make 5-minute break before we reconvene our regular meeting.